All right, guys, we just started this stream, and you guys are on.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to live stream Polo Reef and hosting incredible guest Bobby Humblefish Miller. Welcome, Bobby.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for having me.
And it's a pleasure. And I follow your Johnny Carson night shows and interviews, and it looks like I caught you in a quiet spot. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Repeat that.
I caught you in a nice quiet spot.
Yes. Yeah. This is a good time and good place.
So, Bobby, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're doing now, and whether the peroxide thing, your experiment is over, and if it is or not, what else are you playing with, and what exactly your day consists of these days?
Well, so I'm actually on a little bit of a break from experimentation at the moment. I've completed the hydrogen peroxide experiments to my satisfaction. I'm satisfied that it provides temporary relief of diseases like velvet, brook, flukes. I've also incorporated it into tank transfer method. I call it hybrid tank transfer method, where you give a fish 2 peroxide baths 6 days apart. There are some other people on my forum that have taken the peroxide treatment in a different direction. They're actually dosing it into a DT with corals and inverts. That seems to be a little bit more hit or miss as to, the effectiveness, if that works or not. So that's kind of, I'm pretty happy with the hydrogen peroxide. It's doing what I want it to do. I don't want to say that it's a cure-all. It's not a cure-all. I think it is very effective for temporary relief. I think it could be incorporated into tank transfer method for those who don't want to use copper and other chemicals. The next thing I'm not actually working on at the moment, some of the vendors on my forum is using tea tree oil to treat uranema, because you probably know that is kind of the that's the thing. That's a disease. That's the big problem right now. So we're kind of doing some, I don't really want to get into details about it, but we're kind of getting into some experimentation. I'm not actively experimenting, but there's some vendors on my forum that are experimenting with tea tree oil to eliminate uranema.
Got it. That's interesting. I want to get back to that in a little bit. Bobby, so taking a vacation and taking a break from the hobby means you're still on your forum, you get to see still what's out there and the hot bugs and whatever. What's on the scene? What are you seeing? What's the hot new bug? What are people having issues with? What's going on in the wholesaler systems, et cetera, et cetera? Obviously, uranema is on the list.
Oh yeah, uranema is a huge problem right now. Anybody that is, if you're getting enchromous or anthias, I mean, you really, I advocate prophylactically treating for uranema, especially with, species that are susceptible. The best treatment right now, I feel at the moment, is to give a fish a 250 ppm formalin bath for 45 to 60 minutes. And then you want to follow up by dosing 25 ppm formalin every 24 hours for 2 weeks. It's not effective. It doesn't work 100% of the time, but that's going to be your best option for treating uranema. Other things have seemed to have died down. I mean, we're not really seeing as much in ick or velvet, believe it or not, as we used to. Flukes seem to be on the rise. So I don't know what's going on with this fluke season or whatever, but we are seeing more and more fish getting in flukes. So if you quarantine, you want to, do the Prozzie Pro treatment, twice, about a week apart, to eliminate flukes, especially in wrasses.
Bobby, are you seeing any new bug, this Tahitian bug, this smaller crypto type thing? Are you hearing any resistant stuff? Are you hearing anything really scary out there? Or is it the same old?
It's mostly the same old. So I used to recommend, for using products like Copper Safe and Copper Power, I recommended treating at 2 ppm. I've now raised that recommendation for Copper Power to 2.5 ppm because we did have some cases of people reporting that Velvet in particular was getting through 2.0 Copper Power, but it seems since raising that level to 2.5 ppm, that seems to have solved the problem. So I don't know if this is a case where, I don't know if wholesalers were using it at subtherapeutic and maybe these parasites were building up a resistance, and by raising the recommended therapeutic level, we've knocked that out or not. But other than that, I mean, there's some oddball bacterial stuff that I see sometimes, like Vibrio. But other than that, I mean, things are going pretty well. I kind of really feel, especially with more people using hybrid tank transfer method, incorporating peroxide into their quarantine regimen. I think that's going really well, and I think we're seeing less cases of people, fish just mysteriously dying in quarantine because maybe there is a copper intolerant species, which you never know what fish that's going to be exactly.
Yeah, I actually have that also on my list, which is talking about tailoring the quarantine procedure for the actual species. I know your chart that's out there, 1, 2 through 5, and all that stuff. Whoever made that one up with the chloroquines and the copper. But at the end of the day, experience trumps it all. I'm just wondering, like, let's just take an example. Where would you absolutely not use copper, and where would you absolutely use chloroquine instead, and vice versa?
Well, so I mean, copper, I wouldn't use copper on like lionfish. Puffers, believe it or not, actually I would not use ionic copper on puffer fish, but I would use, chelated copper, like Copper Safe or Copper Power on puffers. Eels, would never use copper on eel. They just they stop eating. Obviously, you don't want to use copper on stingrays, sharks, seahorses, any of those fish. Wrasses, I call them pain in my wrasse because you don't know what they're going to tolerate, what they're not going to tolerate. Some seem to fly through chelated copper just fine, some don't. There have been better success with the hybrid tank transfer method on wrasses, but then again, there's going to be some that aren't going to tolerate it as well. I did a lot of experimentation on chloroquine, but I found that flasher wrasses, I forget the genus that's like, the 6-line wrasse, those don't tolerate it well.
Flashers don't, right.
Possum wrasses and leopard wrasses seem to tolerate chloroquine well, but those two wrasses, Anthias, except for maybe leer tails, don't seem to tolerate chloroquine well. And it's an odd thing, the hippopotamus.
Yep.
That's another fish that can be really difficult to get through chloroquine.
Yep.
For some reason. So I guess if you're looking for a chemical to use which would be best tolerated, it is chelated copper. I mean, it's back to what we've been using for the last 30 years. Copper Safe, Copper Power. I think having the HANA checker really helps because now you're actually able to test it and get a number. So you're not just sitting there trying to, look at a color chart.
Bobby, with uranemia on the rise, why not use chloroquine more and take care of it both ways?
That is a good point. So, when I was running my fish quarantine business, I was actually half the fish I use, copper and metro, and the other half of the fish I use chloroquine. And chloroquine did actually very well with uranema. But what we're starting to see with uranema is we're seeing that uranema actually can infect the fish internally. So, for example, there's a guy on my farm right now, and he actually, I forget what he treated with. It might have been chloroquine, but he's got a fish that shows no signs of uranema. However, he will collect feces samples and look at them under a microscope, and there's actually uranema parasites in the feces, which is telling us that the parasite is still spreading internally inside the fish. And that really is the problem. I think you can use like formalin, you can use chloroquine to eliminate uranema externally, but the $1 million question is, what do you do about a fish that has internal uranema that's actually infecting their organs? Maybe it's actually intracellular, it's actually infecting their cells. I mean, literally you got cancer in a way of putting it, going on inside this fish, but it's urinema, and then you can put this fish in your tank, and then if the parasites are on the feces, and then you could actually infect the tank, with urinema that way. So that's really the big problem with urinema, is how do we treat a fish that has internal urinema? Because food soaking metronidazole seems to work sometimes. Food soaking chloroquine is another option, but it's very bitter tasting. So you have to use something to kind of lace the metallic taste of it.
Yeah, it's also, I'm told, a little long-term dangerous.
Well, yeah, there's that too. Yeah, there's that as well. The danger, and it's kind of hard to get chloroquine nowadays anyway. I only know of one source to buy it from.
Yep, I know that source. That's National Fish Pharmacy. Our
Yep.
friends over at Fishman Chemical.
Yeah, they're the only place to buy chloroquine from, and you have to buy, I think, at least 100 grams is the minimum order. So cheap for some people, I don't know what 100 grams cost nowadays, $200 or something, but a lot of people are like, I don't want to spend $200 just to buy one drug for my fish.
Got it. So Bobby, what I have 50, no, it's probably 100 chromis in the back myself. And they've been through chloroquine, and they've been through metro soaked food, and we lost some to urinema. That's the way they come in, you know that. They get that red freaking line right through them. But whatever's left is now healthy, or looks healthy. There's no meds in there. I'm scared to introduce them into my tank. How's that? You scared me. Why should I even do it?
What I would do before I would introduce those chromis into your tank is I would get an Aquabiomics. So Aquabiomics, I don't know if you've heard about this company, but they now do eDNA testing. Yep. So what they do is they actually are able to test a water sample that you take from a DT or a quarantine tank, and they're able to screen for bacterial diseases and parasites, not flukes, not worms, but they can tell you if the fish in a tank have ick, velvet, brook urinema, or any bacterial diseases. So that would be an option that if you just want to know for certain, they do it two ways. You can submit a water sample to them, and I think it's like $50 or $60, and they will do a screening to see if there's any parasites on the fish in the water. You can also do basically like a skin scrape. They'll send you like a kit. You can take a skin. So, for example, if you have a fish that dies, you're not sure what it is. It's a white dot or a red sore. I mean, maybe it's Vibrio. Maybe it's not urinema. Right. You can do a scrape. You can send it back to them, and they'll confirm that for you.
Hey. So Bobby, is there, as long as we're on this Aquabiomics test kit, have they improved the time, the way I get my results back? Because there's a lot of people that complained about that month plus. And then also, there was urinary in that tank. Maybe there is still some in the water. Maybe I don't even want to know. maybe it's chasing numbers. I don't know. You tell me. Am I chasing ghosts?
Well, some people, because urinema has no fallow period, I suspect a lot of tanks have urinema. I think actually that same source, Aquabiomics, said that they tested, I forget where they said the source was, but they tested live rock from various retailers, and over half of that rock had urinema, because again, it doesn't have a fallow period. It will subsist off detritus and bacteria if without a fish. So, I mean, you could be getting urinema on a rock. You could be getting it on an invert. So a lot of people have urinema in their tank. It doesn't seem to cause a problem until the populations explode. So, some people will do things like, they'll run a UV sterilizer, they'll run ozone, they'll run a diatom filter. They'll do a lot of things to keep those parasites sublethal. I know you got a lot to lose. You're talking about putting these in the 17,000 gallon or something, one of your smaller tanks?
Well, something connected to the 17,000, doesn't matter. Something connected, either the 300 or the 17, yes, but it's connected to the 17,000.
I would think in water.
It's a little nerve-wracking to me. I tried to nuke. I nuked them pretty good. They've gotten 2 formalin baths already.
I mean, it's a hard question to answer. Obviously you got a lot to lose if you get uranema in one of your tanks, especially if they're tied together. However, considering how much water volume you're dealing with, the dilution factor, I think even if you got uranema in that big tank, I don't think you would see fish developing symptoms from it. I think you have enough dilution where the parasite populations are never going to become a problem in your specific situation.
Do you know the microjoules of a UV? How much you need to kill uranema versus velvet or ick or anything like that? Do you know the sensitivity to UV?
There's never been any studies. It's all basically, I'd have to look it up, but there have been studies on freshwater ick, and I forget exactly what that was, but all of whether or not a UV actually works on saltwater parasites, it's all extrapolated from that information. There have never actually been any scientific studies on how effective a UV sterilizer is, or what the flow rate or what it has to be to kill saltwater pathogens.
So that article that had all those microjoules in it, that was a freshwater article.
Yes, that was for freshwater ick specifically.
Got it. Interesting. All right, Bobby. So a lot of people want to know a little bit about. They set up a fish tank. They set up a fish tank, and they throw some coral in there, and things are going okay. And one day they see their powder blue or Achilles tang, and it's always or hippo. They have some dots on them. Okay, they're eating fine. They're all good. There's some dots. I know. I actually watched the interview, Bobby, with the fresh clam. I can tell you it did not work. The fresh clam in the gut. I have some ideas that what do work. We can talk about them.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do? Are you going after that fish right away and you taking them all out and going or are you going to try to manage this thing? Or is it a function of how big the tank is and what a big pain in the ass it is?
It's a tough question to ask because in my opinion, my views on this have evolved, and I don't think there's a wrong answer. I think anyone setting up an aquarium, I think you should pick a lane, right? Quarantine or manage. The worst thing that a new hobbyist or someone just setting up a tank can do is just say, well, I'm going to get lucky or it's not going to happen to me. Right. If you don't quarantine, you're going to get something. It's just a matter of time before you get ick or velvet or something in your tank.
Quarantine and manage. God forbid something goes badly, right? Yes.
Right. So it kind of comes down to, if you're going to quarantine, there's protocols for that. If you're going to manage, I've always felt like it's a two-step process. I think you have to have dilution. So why don't the fish in the ocean, why aren't they all dying from parasites? Well, there's a gazillion gallons of water that are diluting the parasites. So you have to replicate that. Right. And what I mean by that is you have to keep the number of parasites in the water at a sublethal concentration. Right. So that's when what I call management tools come into play, like a UV sterilizer, ozone, a diatom filter. In an emergency situation, you can dose hydrogen peroxide. But I also feel the other side of the equation is nutrition. I think a lot of new hobbyists just rely too heavily on flakes and pellets and whatever, and they're not. Look, if you've got herbivores, they need algae. If you've got omnivores, carnivores, they need meat. Not just clams, but clams, mysis, shrimp, scallops. There's recipes you can find online, or some companies make their own food. But I think we know that a fish's immune system is powered by their gut flora. So you have to feed that gut flora to power the immune system. Right. So it's a two-step thing. You want to dilute the parasites in the water, while simultaneously you want to boost your fish's immune system to deal with the parasites that survive. And I'm just saying that I think that should be the game plan for someone either who has just newly set up an aquarium or is encountering a problem and is trying to decide what to do. And the reason I'm trying to say you need to do it beforehand, Usually by the time you start seeing the parasites on the fish,
Oh yeah, this has already been going on. You haven't seen it. Yes, right.
exactly, it's too late. You're much better starting off from day one with management techniques. So you either never get to that point, or if you do get to that point, you've got a plan in place to deal with it, to manage the parasites.
Right. So Bobby, you know, I had some things slip by, and we have some dots occasionally, and we had it again recently. And it turns out that the guy that I usually feeds the fish was gone, and the new guy was here. Maybe they didn't have as much food, or changed the food, or the amount of food. Any event, what are you hearing? What are people, besides peroxide, what are you hearing? Snake oil stuff that people are using. Are you polymedic is just peroxide and fancy salts?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not trying to bang on that product, but I mean, if you're going to go that route, you might as well just go bottle, spend $1, go spend $1, go to Walmart, buy a bottle of hydrogen peroxide and just do it yourself. Because essentially it's hydrogen peroxide, which I mean, peroxide is an oxidizer.
Yeah,
So you're
so
oxidizing the parasites either in the water column or possibly even on the fish.
Right, so under that method, you basically are dosing 3 to 4 times a day, and you're keeping the ppms as close to 3 to 5 or something like that, maybe up to 10, and you're dosing at night. And if the corals don't love it, just for everybody that knows, the corals are not thrilled. You got to turn down your whites, you got to lower your par, and you still may lose some smooth skin acros. But other than that, I didn't see much damage.
Yeah, so that's one option. I really don't personally have a lot of experience with other management products. I will say one. Okay, there is one I do, and I don't have the experience. But where I used to live, there was a local fish store that I'm always on the hunt for sick fish. I go into fish stores looking for sick fish to buy, and there was this one fish store that really frustrated me because I went into this store all the time for like 4 years, and the guy, I never saw symptoms of disease on any of his fish, and he didn't quarantine the fish. Well, come to find out, he was using these 2 products. One was called Herptania, the other one was called Artemis, and I suspect they're, like herbal remedies. But whatever they were doing, they were either boosting the fish's immune system or maybe providing the fish with a thicker mucus to resist the parasites. But, that's a forever thing, because, I mean, I know people who would buy fish from him, take the fish home, they had ick or velvet. So it's kind of like if you're not using these products indefinitely, then something is going to slip through.
What do the guys that feed medicine in the foods, well, what are you hearing? I mean, I've tried a whole bunch of stuff, and I don't know, but not just me. There's someone else that's tried what I've said, and we think it actually makes a difference. We don't know why or can explain it, but are you hearing anything like that? It's not the metro in the food. I know a lot of people try that. Have you ever heard of people trying the TMP sulfur in the food? Like a sulfathiazole? It's the trimeth stuff that is supposedly active. Don't know why it works, but it seems to work for me.
Are you talking about for treating like internal bacterial infections, or?
No, I'm talking about cryptocarine, and I can't explain why.
Okay.
TMP sulfur is the product from our buddies at National Fish Pharmaceuticals.
Mm-hmm.
And someone told me to try it, that the other people have been experimenting, and I seem to have some good luck with it.
So I haven't experimented with that. Are you just using it as like a general prophylactic?
No, I'm using it when the fish get dots and scratch, and it definitely seems to help.
So
5 days on, 5 days off.
I'm mostly the experimentation I've done has been lacing fish food to treat internal pathogens. Praziquantel if a fish has intestinal worms, metronidazole if they have internal parasites. I've had good success using neomycin actually for internal bacterial infections.
Right.
But I have not personally had a lot of success dosing food to treat external pathogens. That's just my treatment is more like I usually dose the water for that. I know we've talked before also about doing the injections.
Yeah.
The intramuscular injections, those work really well for treating external bacterial infections.
Sure. Yeah, so actually there's actually some studies that actually show that levamisole actually has proven immunity if you feed it to the fish also. You heard that?
I haven't heard that. I know that was a dewormer,
Right.
I believe, that was like kind of the precursor to praziquantel.
Right, yes. It was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you know what? There's treatments out there that because I'm trying to think of a good example. So here's a good example. A good example is that formulation that NFP sells, the nitrofuranous green powder. So that is supposed to be mostly but it's kind of a wide spectrum treatment because it does treat parasites and bacteria. But I've also seen some efficacy against flukes using that stuff. I've given some fish some baths with nitrofuranous and green powder, and if a fish has external skin flukes, they actually fall off the fish. The flukes actually turn kind of bluish, and then they fall off the fish like a bluish white and fall off the fish. So there's something about that. Maybe it's the methylene blue. I mean, there's nitrofurazone. I think there is one of the sulfur products in that as well that is not known to be effective against worms, but it seems to work in a bath treatment. So yeah, it doesn't surprise me that there's other products like what you're talking about that you can food soak that have efficacy against things that we, aquaculture doesn't generally doesn't know about.
Yeah. Let's talk. Let's just switch topics for a second completely, and talk about another boogeyman in the room, which is coral quarantine, right?
Mm-hmm.
There seems to be very huge differences between protecting the fish and protecting the coral. And the two are not necessarily consistent with one another. Unless you protected the coral and from the fish and from the worms and this and dipping and feeding it nutrients and doing it all for the 6-7 week period in addition. Can you give us a little bit of sort of, like now when I'm dealing with corals, I'm much more interested in flatworms and making sure eggs don't go into the tank than I am a trophant. Why is that? Is that because I have the trophants in the tank already and it doesn't matter?
Right. So me personally, so my primary reason to quarantine corals and inverts is because I'm concerned about tomotes being on them.
Right.
So, where most people know for fish diseases that a fish with trophonts, that's the usual carrier. That's what, if the fish has the parasites on them, you introduce a sick fish or it's in their gills or whatever, and that's how the parasite gets into your tank. Right. But what a lot of people don't realize is, well, the ick and velvet anyway, they both have call it an egg or a cyst stage that we call they call tomotes. And this is the stage of the parasite after the parasite drops off the fish, crawls around, it finds like a hard surface to insist upon. I just lost your I'll keep talking, but if you're still there, your screen just went like it's just like different colors. I don't see you at all.
Let me see. Rashid, something happened with the colors.
Yeah, the screen completely went away, and it's now just I see lines like
All right.
I have vertical lines, different colors.
Okay. All right. Go ahead.
Yeah.
The emergency
So
broadcast system. That's the
yeah, exactly. No, you're back now. Okay. So tomotes on corals, that's the stage after the parasites drop off the fish. They crawl around, they find a hard surface. It can be a snail shell or a hermit crab shell.
Yep.
It can be the hard part of like an LPS coral. And they don't insist on live coral tissue, but they insist on rock, sand, whatever.
Right.
So this is another vector that you can get diseases into your tank. And I mean, nobody wants to hear that because they're like, you're telling me I have to quarantine the corals and inverts too on top of the fish. And unfortunately, the only way to neutralize the threat is to place the coral or invert in a fishless frag tank or whatever and leave them there for 6 weeks. I recommend raising the water temperature at 81 degrees Fahrenheit to make sure the life cycle is sped up. And you're basically waiting them out. You're waiting for enough time for free swimmers to be released in the water. There won't be fish in the fishless frag tank, and the free swimmers don't find a host and they die off. So that's my primary concern. I think if I understood your question correctly, you're more concerned about flatworms and using dips and things like that to eliminate that possibility.
At this point, if somebody comes in with attached to a rock, Phoebe, stop! And if I don't know the system where it came from, I know it's not clean, I'm more cautious.
Phoebe, come here. Come here.
Stop. I'm definitely more cautious and will wait the 6 weeks out probably. If I know the tank and there hasn't been any new fish introduced in 5 years and there's no rock on it at all, it's just an aqua, coral skeleton tissue, I'm less worried about the trophons and I'm more concerned about flatworms, bugs, and that kind of thing. And putting a coral through a fishless system for 6 weeks is pretty stressful on the coral unless you're feeding that coral phosphate and nitrate and nutrients also.
Right.
So there's and then you're testing that almost every couple of days, and so it's just a lot of checks along with alk and calcium, all that stuff. And if you're still not dipping it and watching for pests, the 6 weeks you could be free of tomots and then basically wipe out all your coral with aquaphora eating flatworms. So what does that get you?
Yeah, I hear you there. I mean, like my solution to that, like you said, you can actually make your own phosphated nitrates to dose to keep those at where they're supposed to be. If you're quarantining, LPS corals, you can target feed them to be sure that they're well fed. There's products for SPS, for acros and stuff. Like I think it's called Reef Chili, and there's other products that you can use to keep them well fed. If you're quarantining inverts, like snails and hermit crabs or whatever, I mean, they eat algae. So you'll have to maybe put some nori in the tank. You'll have to use some algae wafers. I mean, there's no question. It's more work. It's more work. It's more time and energy, more money to have to set up the tank.
Quarantining inverts and crabs, like you tend to order them when you need them, and then you can't even use them for 6-7 weeks. It's a brutal process, right?
But what's the answer? Because for example, I mean, there's someone I'm helping right now who, I don't want to name the person, but the person basically, quarantined all their fish, checked all the boxes, and then they ordered some snails, put them right in, and now they've got velvet.
Yeah,
and
snails, I'd be very cautious. I mean, snails go through our fishless system for 6.5, 7 weeks. There's no exception.
Right. But there are some things you can do to mitigate. So, let's just say you're like, okay, look, I'm not going to quarantine my corals. Well, let's just take some acros. A lot of people have acro reefs. Well, if you were to take that acro, as long as that acro has it's a healthy frag and it's covered in live coral tissue, which tomos can't insist upon, and you can you can remove it from its plug, put it on a dry plug. Well, you've just neutralized the threat right there. You don't have to quarantine anything. You've taken the steps that you need to neutralize the threat of tomos being on that coral so that you can just basically safely bypass quarantine in that circumstance and put the coral right in your tank. Right. I would be more concerned with, for example, LPS, like torch corals and frog spawn that have that solid base that obviously is the base of the coral that, I mean, tomos could insist upon that. Soft corals, most of the times, they can be detached from their rock and then, put on a rubber band or whatever onto a plug, a dry plug, to neutralize the threat of toe moths on those. Or here we go, shrimp. So let's say you've got a bunch of cleaner shrimp, and this can be a little tough. Once that shrimp sheds its exoskeleton and molts, well, yeah, any toe moths would have been on that old exoskeleton. That shrimp is now safe to put in your DT. Right. So there are some ways of mitigating it so it's not so extreme.
Go put 100 shrimp in a system and figure out which one shed. It's a little hard.
You'd have to put them in a like little compartments or whatever, and as they shed, you could put them in your tank, I guess.
Right.
And you also don't want to add them too quickly after they shed because they're still, soft.
Yes. Yeah, the new exoskeleton is still soft. You got to give it a few days for the exoskeleton to fully harden before handling them.
Exactly.
All right. So, Bobby, I want to talk to you about medication toxic combinations. How's that? And some weird things that have happened to me recently. Let's talk about the obvious no-nos, okay? Like, what do you not, when copper power with prime is okay.
Yes.
Copper safe is not, right? Is that the way it works?
So I've only tested prime with copper power. I haven't done any other testing other than that.
Right.
I think probably you can use prime with copper safe. I just have not actually tested to verify that, but I have tested that copper power is safe to use with Seachem Prime.
Which is a huge benefit because, as we all know, if you set up a quarantine tank, my biological's in good shape because it's been used for years and years and years. But and we've had fish loaded in it, and we keep the copper in there basically, unless we bleach it. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people get ammonia during this period, and unless you're doing 75-80% water changes, which you can do, prime is a great daily thing until the water gets mucky, gross, and disgusting after the 5-6 days and the water goes cloudy on you. Is that can you keep using it or no?
So the only problem with prime is this. So when you dose prime, well, I just want to say one thing, just because anybody watching this, don't ever use prime with cupramine, or don't ever use prime with copper sulfate. I just wanted to put that out there just to be safe. Only use prime with copper power only. We'll just say that at this point. Those are the only two products that are compatible.
Right.
So here's the problem with prime. So you dose prime, and it only binds the ammonia in the water for 24 to 48 hours.
Right.
So unless you are removing it via biological filtration or you're doing your water changes, then that ammonia, it's just going to release the ammonia back into the water. The problem with continuously dosing prime is you can dose it every 24 hours, but as it binds more and more and more ammonia, that water is going to start to turn cloudy, because it's basically the bound ammonia that's in the water that's now turning cloudy. So I kind of recommend, if you can use prime with copper power, it's a Band-Aid, gets you through the day or whatever. But, when you get home from work, go ahead and do a water change. Look, there's never going to be a downside of doing a water change on a quarantine tank to keep the water quality optimal for your fish.
Put the medication in the quarantine water, not after.
Yes. Yeah. I'm sorry. Say that one more time.
Always put the medication, reminding people not to put the medication in the tank after the water change, but to put it in the water change water itself.
Yeah. Yeah, if you're doing a water change and you got copper and your copper's at 2.5, you want to mix 2.5 ppm copper in the bucket of the replacement water. You don't want that copper level you don't want it to deviate. You don't want it to be lower. You want it to be consistent at all times, because, it's that 5 or 10 seconds that the copper drops below therapeutic, where a free swimmer just happens to get released. It's in the water, finds a host, and your treatment fails.
And with chloroquine, even more so, because you have no idea what the real levels are other than what you dosed, and which is why we do water changes using chloroquine every 4 or 5 days. We just do about 60-70% of the tank and redose that 70%, bang, right away.
Yeah. Yeah, chloroquine has two, I mean, obviously, the two problems with chloroquine, there is no practical test kit. You have to use a spectrophotometer or something like that to test it. The other problem with chloroquine is it's susceptible to biodegradation.
Yeah.
So if there's any bacteria in that tank, there's biofilm on the quarantine, you're running a biofilter, that it's actually going to degrade that. It's going to actually consume the medication. And you have no idea what the therapeutic level actually is, which is why, technically speaking, chloroquine is best used in a sterile QT.
Right. Although I've used it in display tanks without coral, and at least you can get it out as opposed to copper kind of thing.
Yeah, I've actually advised some. So every now and then I'll get a local fish shop or something. It contacts me and they've got ichor velvet going through their system, and they're like, I've just got to do something. They don't want to use copper for various reasons. Chloroquine seems to work in most cases, not 100% of the time, even in a system with rock and sand, providing you keep up with the redosing. Yeah, you have to keep, I think it's one milligram per liter per day that you have to keep dosing the medication back to the water. And what you're doing is, because chloroquine has such a wide therapeutic range, it's actually 10 to 20 milligrams per liter. You're it's kind of like, it's not too low, it's not too high, it's right where it needs to be. And that seems to work. It seems to be a 30-day strategy that has worked more times than not.
Yeah, I go up to about 55 milligrams per gallon, maybe 60 per gallon. But I won't go there for sensitive fish. And we do redose it every 3-4 days in the water change water. I know your methodology on the bump, the 10% bump method. I guess I would use that if it was in a display tank and I wasn't changing the water every 3 days.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, it's mostly, I developed that for people who were going to use it in a DT, or people that were going to use it in a quarantine tank where they're using an active biofilter. Look, some people go years without sterilizing their quarantine tank. And what they don't realize is that after about a few months, you have enough bacteria in that tank where, other than copper, it's going to degrade any medication you dose. There's been studies, praziquantel and formalin has been degraded in a matter of hours because there were enough, I think it's actually heterotrophic bacteria in that tank that were degrading the medications.
Right. Okay, Bobby, so let's switch to praziquantel. You have a reef tank. You suspect you might have a fluke, or you just, I don't know, a fish or whatever. No problem with SBS, no problem with corals, just go do it. You still got to take off your UV, you still got to run those skimmers, you still got to dose do it again every 4 or 5 days to get the eggs, and it degrades like you said, so it may not even work. Right,
exactly. So Prozzie, when you dose, so we're going to talk about Prozzie in a reef tank. You dose Prozzie in a reef tank.
Let's discuss that, yeah.
So Prozzie in a reef tank seems to, it's like quasi reef safe. It seems like what I've seen, the two things that happen, anemones and SPS will sometimes bleach after dosing it. They usually bounce back. But again, like you're saying, the problem with dosing, any medication in a reef tank, and Prozzie included, is you don't know if it's, because it needs to be really in the water about 24 hours to do its job fully at that low concentration. Because I think it's the Prozzie Pro concentration, which most people use, is like 2.5 milligrams a liter.
Right.
At that low concentration, you kind of really need 24 hours of exposure time. So you want to disable carbon, turn off your UV for that 24-hour period. But the unknown factor is, are the bacteria in your DT, are they going to degrade that medication below therapeutic in that 24-hour time frame? That's just a big unknown. Again, without a photometer, there's no practical way to measure Prozzie in the water. I know before you had said about interactions. Well, Prozzie Pro is actually one of these medications that doesn't play nice with other meds.
Yeah, it does not play nice.
Yeah. So if you mix it with copper, you mix it with chloroquine, you mix it with antibiotics, Prozzie Pro actually it's the agent that's in it that dissolves the powder. It actually can cause a bacterial bloom. When mixed with other medications, the water turns very cloudy.
Yeah, we don't use it. We use your DSMO methodology.
Yes. Yeah, that's the best thing to do is just to use powder Prozzie with DMSO, and DMSO does not seem to cause the bacterial bloom problems that Prozzie Pro does.
Right. So Bobby, the other day, tell me how this can happen. How do you take 2 quarantine tanks that have been treated months ago, maybe 6 months ago? There were some black tangs I had some baby regal angels in there from Valley Aquaculture. I'm afraid to tell you some white koi tangs, and I needed some room in the quarantine tanks, okay? And I combined 2 quarantines together, both healthy, or at least seemed to be healthy. The black tangs moved over to another system, and all of a sudden I'm looking at the regals, and it looks like fin tail rot to me. It looks like something like that because they're so small. So I started an antibiotic in there, some kanamycin, and some nitrofurazone. That combo, I like that combo. And then an hour later, now I'm seeing white patches on the black tang like velvet, So I threw some chloroquine in there. And within 20 minutes, things started dropping. I don't know if it was the chloroquine. And I've used chloroquine with kanamycin before. I don't understand what happened there. In fact, every fish that I took out of that system and put in another system with just chloroquine survived.
So you're saying by mixing chloroquine, nitrofurazone, and kanamycin, fish started dropping dead?
Yeah, but it was 2 antibiotics first and then chloroquine second. Yeah, exactly.
That's strange because I've used that combination myself and I have not experienced any issues. I will say this, I don't think it applies in this situation, but you do have to be a little careful combining too many medications because everything you dose into the water, the fishes, the fish drink the water and through the gills, the fish's liver and kidneys has to filter all those medications. So, 1 or 2 medications, they can filter, but if you start combining too many medications, maybe 3 or more, then you're looking at the possibility of liver and kidney failure or damage in the fish, but that wouldn't kill the fish quickly. That's more of something that plays out over a period of days or weeks.
Like I started seeing blood vessels, you know what I'm saying, Bobby?
Yeah, that's really, really weird. The only thing I can think of is, did you make a scrape after they died, or do any gram staining? It could have been a fast spreading bacterial infection, maybe,
or a wicked velvet bug that it didn't catch on time. Yeah, it's possible.
Yeah.
Now I don't know how putting 2 healthy tanks together and just moving from one side to the other causes that, but whatever. In this hobby, it's like whatever is as good an answer as any.
Hey, Andrew, let's focus in on cross-contamination and what we think maybe even triggered that.
Bob,
we got some new fish.
Cross-contamination, we had some other things quarantining at the same time. Who knows what someone's got a pump, they move it from one to blah, blah, blah. Again, it's something, but it's, these were seemingly 2 healthy systems with fish housing both systems. They joined together and boom.
Yeah, that's really strange. Like you said, look, things like that happen. This hobby, there are sometimes you figure it out, sometimes you never figure out what happened. And here's a little something else to consider. We talk about these diseases, we talk about ick, velvet, urinema, flukes, whatever, and we maybe talk about maybe at most, maybe 20 or 30 different diseases. But just like with our own bodies, there are probably thousands of different diseases that are in the ocean.
Yeah.
There's different variations, different variants, different
Yeah.
strains, and I always tell people, look, you do the best you can, but eventually you're going to come up against something that no medication is going to treat, nothing is going to stop. You're going to suffer a 100% wipeout in your QT. You're just going to have to sterilize the thing and start over. But from my point of view, better for that to happen in a quarantine tank than in your display tank.
Absolutely. Now, Bobby, you know the story about the aquariums that had what's the story? They had like a hookworm. Prozzie wasn't strong enough. You sometimes see those needles like sticking out of the fish, and Prozzie's not enough, and so they use Dilox or something stronger, and something goes bad, and they wipe out the tank. And just talk about that.
So there are anchor worms, for example, that will actually embed in the fish. So that's more of a freshwater problem than saltwater. It's not completely unheard of in saltwater, but you do have anchor worms that some fish will get, and then really the only thing you do for that is manual. You have to catch the fish and pull them out with tweezers. It's manual removal. I think what a lot of people do run into though sometimes is the parasitic isopods.
Right, copepods. Yeah. Isopod. Yeah.
And that's something that you'll get, again, it has an egg stage, so it probably hitchhikes in on a coral, and there's an egg, and you have this parasitic isopod in your tank.
Right.
And yeah, those are really tough to beat. I mean, I've even seen cases where they stand up to formalin. And it seems like, I think it's Dilox, and there's another treatment that you can use, but neither treatment is obviously reef safe. That's kind of a nightmare scenario when you get those in a DT. Yeah. I'm trying to remember. There's Dilox and there's another medication. Actually, the koi people use it a lot because they use it. They get a lot of like fish lice.
Myoflex?
It's
Myoflex for pond bacterias? That's something we use for flatworms and things of that sort.
So it could be something like that. I forget what the active ingredient is, but it's something that people that encounter it end up basically giving their fish a bath using it's a pond medication. But fortunately, it's pretty rare. I mean, that's not something that's often encountered.
Right. Okay, so Bobby, what else do you think we should talk about? Should we talk about freshwater dips and formalin baths and Cipro? Should we just do a general bath discussion?
So here's the thing. I like baths because I think it does one of two things. So if you are going to quarantine, then I think doing a medicated bath actually gives your fish the best starting point in quarantine, because if you get a fish in quarantine that's has a heavy infestation of parasites and worms, then you're already kind of under the gun trying to add medications. The fish is already heavily infested and in bad shape.
Right.
And then conversely, if you don't quarantine, then in my opinion, giving a fish a medicated bath to knock off most of the pathogens is better than doing nothing.
Right.
So what I like to use, my little 1-2 punch is a 30-minute, 150 ppm hydrogen peroxide bath. There's instructions on my forum on, I think it's 1 ml. I can't think right now. It's
1 ml. Yeah. It's per 5 gallon bucket.
Yeah. So I like to do that first, because what that is going to do is that's going to knock off parasites and worms. But then I like to follow that up with a 30-minute nitrofuracin green powder bath. And that's going to take care of any bacterial issues. If the fish has ammonia burn, it's going to help with that. So it's kind of a 1-2 punch: hydrogen peroxide bath first, and then after 30 minutes, a 30-minute bath using NFG, and then put the fish either in your quarantine or DT, depending if you're going to quarantine or not. I'm not a big fan of freshwater.
Hit them with the formalin right away.
Well, okay, so all right. Well, I don't like to do formalin right away unless we're talking about Chromis or Anthias, because they have such a high likelihood of carrying urinema, and we know what a nightmare that disease is. So when you're dealing with those specific species, and yes, I would do the formalin bath in lieu of the peroxide bath. Okay. Or any fish that you suspect of carrying urinema. Peroxide has some efficacy against urinema, but obviously nothing is stronger than treating with formalin a formalin bath, and I've actually upped my recommendation to 250 ppm because I've seen too many cases now of urinema getting through 150 and even 200 ppm.
250 is, I'm using 4 mLs in a 5-gallon bucket. That's the old bath?
Yes, the new recommendation I'm going with is 1 ml per gallon.
1 ml per gallon, so that's 5.
Yeah.
So that's 5 mils per 5 gallons.
It's another mill, yeah.
So that's not a
Yeah.
big deal,
Yeah.
right?
It sounds like you were doing 200. This just raises it to 250. Most fish tolerate that just fine. Actually, if you want to get technical about it, it's actually 0.95 ml per gallon. But I mean, that little extra 1 ml per gallon is not going to raise it that significantly, and it's easy for people to measure on like a pipette or on a syringe and everything. So yeah, for fish that you suspect have urinema, Chromis and Anthias are at the top of that list. I would do the formalin bath. I would still do the NFG second, but I would do the formalin bath instead of the peroxide bath.
And make sure that formalin is not cloudy on the bottle, right? You can go through that. Just make sure the bottle is fresh and new.
Yes.
Amazon, etc. You order it fresh. We throw out ours like every year. Just throw out any used bottles.
It actually formalin only has a 6-month shelf life.
Yep.
It's not the formaldehyde, it's the methanol that's in it actually starts to turn it to paraformaldehyde, which is more toxic than just formaldehyde. So that's the reason why. Peroxide, peroxide, if it gets exposed to air, gets exposed to light, but it doesn't actually turn toxic, it just becomes less effective. But peroxide is so cheap that, you might as well just every 6 months just toss it and get a new bottle.
Yeah, we get, again, we use the 30% stuff because we have to. But that stuff is real, other than wearing gloves and eyewear, like it's really easy and you just don't dose a lot. It's very easy to use.
Yeah, that's the good stuff. That's the aquaculture approved stuff.
Yeah, that's the good stuff.
Yeah. So I'm just saying for people that are just buying it at Walmart, which is fine because it's a lot more diluted, which is why in the instructions you dose more than what you're using. Every 6 months I would just toss and buy a new bottle. It's like 99 cents for a bottle of that stuff.
Yeah.
Walmart. Yeah. And you know what? I just want to say this. That is the reason why I invested so much of myself into peroxide, and I wanted to prove its effectiveness because, so many times people contact me and it's Saturday or Sunday and all their fish have velvet and, they don't have anything. They don't have copper. They don't have any medications. I wanted to provide the hobby with a product that anybody, any time of the night could go run to Walmart, could go anywhere, and they could buy at a grocery store, and they could have a treatment that would at least provide temporary, relief. So your screen went off again.
Yeah, I see that. I see it went off.
Oh, you're back. Okay.
Okay. This is the emergency broadcast. Bobby, what are you hearing on the quarantine fish industry? It's not a good business. The power of medications and the premiums you get for quarantine fish. It's tough business. What are you hearing? Who's doing it right? Who's not? Are there less companies doing it? Seems like they do it, but it's rare fish. It seems like a lot of it's around.
So it seems like everybody and their brother is now selling quarantine fish. It's become kind of a catchphrase. My fish are quarantined. And look, I don't know. Some people are doing it the right way, and some are maybe half-assing it, right? We don't really know. I will say on my forum, we have a whole section of the forum dedicated to quarantine fish vendors, quarantine livestock vendors. I vet every single one of them. I work with a lot of them. A lot of them we collaborate on. A lot of the knowledge that I share are actually collaborations between myself and the quarantine fish vendors. And I provide them with the blueprint on this is how I quarantine on a commercial level because I did it for like 3 years. So this is how I did it, and this is the blueprint. a lot of them will take it and they will maybe make some modifications and changes, and that's fine. As long as they're not selling diseased fish, as long as they're providing good customer service, we don't have a problem. But when I start getting reports from members that they're buying sick fish, they got to go. I mean, I'm sorry, but as long as you're providing the product that you say you're providing, which is quarantine healthy fish, we don't have a problem. But when I start getting too many reports that there's a problem with the fish, there's ick, there's velvet, there's diseases, then I have to remove them as a quarantine vendor. So I like to think I do a pretty good job policing that and making sure that the quarantine vendors on my forum are actually the real deal.
What's been the churn rate? How many of you let on and kicked off, Bobby?
Probably have let on about 15 or 20, and I've probably kicked off about 6 to 8 so far. So, I mean, and some of them have been friends of mine. These are people I've known for years and years, and it causes hard feelings between us and all the rest of it. But at the end of the day, I have to do what's right for the hobby. I have to do what's right for our members. I have to do what's right for for the quarantine fish vendors. And you're right, it is not a profitable business venture.
It's not profitable. So how do we expect them to survive? And then what?
Well, it's not profitable at the moment, and I don't want to show any favoritism. There is one vendor on my forum that's got about a 90% success rate, and he is starting to turn the corner. He is making it profitable. What he's doing is all the profits he's making, he's just reinvesting it in his business to grow it out even further. And the only thing that's stopping him from having an even higher success rate is Uranema. That's the thing that comes along every so often, kicks his butt, and he's got to kind of, bleach everything and start over. But if we can just figure that out, then I think it would be profitable. I'm not saying you're going to get rich doing it, but I think you could make it a profitable business if we could solve this Uranema problem.
What's the average premium a quarantine fish gets in percentage terms over an unquarantined fish? Same fish, 10, 15%, 20%?
No, most of my vendors are charging at least 50% above.
50, is that it?
Yeah, 50% above regular retail price. So a $100 fish would sell for $150. Some charge more, but considering especially with another thing, it depends on the fish. I mean, if we're talking just a yellow tang, then you may only be looking at a 50% markup above regular retail. Now, if we're talking something like a copper-banded butterfly, which is a pain in the butt to get eating and you have to go through a lot more, well, then those fish would probably sell maybe even double. That would be a fish that would even sell maybe double what you normally would pay. But think about how many people do you know have gone through half a dozen copper band butterflies just to get one that eats.
Right.
So, you have to kind of, like I can think of other fish that would command a higher price, leopard wrasses. There's certain wrasses that are really sensitive.
Just as a side story, the last set of chody wrasses I got, which is a leopard wrasse, the red chody wrasses, right?
Mm-hmm.
I went 0 for 8 in quarantine with copper. Or
right.
If the copper touched the wholesaler. The next batch, I told I told Eric Cohen, and Eric's a great guy. Do not let those guys, that's Ammonia Reef, do not let any of those fish touch copper. Just get them to me. And I didn't put them through any copper, transfer and all such. I went 7 for 8. So there are obviously certain fish. I spoke to a fish vet like Regal Angels. They did a bunch of autopsies. Their liver melted with copper.
Right.
There are certain no fish, I guess. You just and you can get the quarantine fish and it poops out of you because the liver poops out of you in your tank. They're quarantined great. There's no bugs, but their liver's damaged, and 3 months later they're dead in your tank.
So were they able to confirm that the liver damage was from copper poisoning? Because
yes.
Ammonia and actually cyanide will also basically destroy a fish's liver.
The fish vet that I talked to. You know Charles. He claims yes, proven.
Interesting. What did he say? What type of copper they were exposed to?
No.
Okay. Because I think, okay, so here's the thing. I mean, it could be chelated copper does this, but I know most wholesalers they use copper sulfate.
Copper sulfate, yeah.
You know, because, and actually the fish metabolizes copper sulfate.
Right.
So I would think you would see more toxic, like, liver, kidney toxic issues especially if an angelfish was put in copper sulfate pentahydrate versus using a product like Copper Power or Copper Safe, because they're actually metabolizing the copper internally.
Right.
So that could maybe
that's where these fish come from, right?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. They all go through the wholesale facilities. The wholesale facilities, a lot of them do run copper sulfate. Some run at like a sublethal concentration. I'll be honest with you, most of my quarantine vendors have better success if they're able to transship. So if they're able to just order direct from the collectors and bypass the wholesalers, usually that shipment of fish has a higher success rate than if it has to go through a wholesale facility.
Exactly. That's a good point. That's a great point. Yeah.
Drew, before we start getting to some Q&A, for our last topic, let's hit on the Doomsday event for this tank specifically.
Okay.
And then let's talk about
how do you want to pose this question? All right, Bobby.
like the discussions we had, God forbid.
We want to talk to you about a specific situation in a very big tank. A very big tank. What happens when you're faced with that decision? Holy shit, it's either the fish or the coral. I got to make that decision right now. Obviously, we have other facilities, but how do you go catching 500,000 fish, or like what am I going to do? Put them to sleep? How do you do that? Or am I doing the coral? I have nightmare dreams about that, Bobby.
I think in your situation, I mean, or anybody that's got a tank that big, I don't really think pulling all the fish and quarantining is an option. I think you would use alternative methods. I think you maybe would try the peroxide thing, where you would it's a 6-week dosing regimen. I think you would try that.
I did it all 6 weeks. I did it all 6 weeks, Bob.
Yep, and it worked, right?
I mean, it worked, but look, you don't know, and we don't know whether it would have worked just changing my UV bulbs and feeding that yeah, sure it worked, but this time around, I did not use the hydrogen sulfide, the peroxide, and it looks like the last few days that I'm winning. And I am going to change my UV bulbs. I'm due for a change. It's now 7 months, so we're going to change them now. I'm fighting back with that TMP sulfur. We make all sorts of cakes and stews with it. I think I lost one anthias, one anthias. So I'm not too worried about it. But you have to plan for emergencies.
Right.
And planning is scary.
I mean, I would think in that situation, there's no way you can pull the fish. I mean, in your shoes, I would go full-blown management. So I would do things like, run the biggest UV, I know the biggest UV sterilizer, even though it's not proven to work, but the biggest UV sterilizer that you can fit on that tank. I would run ozone. I would plumb some pool-grade diatom filters into that to eliminate from the freeze warmers. I would try to do as much as I could to dilute the number of parasites in the tank, understanding you're going to have losses. I mean, you're not going to save all the fish, but there have been some studies that if fish are exposed to various pathogens at a sublethal concentration for X number of months, they will develop immunity or resistance, depending on which word you want to use. And that would be my goal for my core stock of fish to develop resistance or immunity.
So, Bobby, just to follow up with that, this is Rashid with you. So, to summarize, whether you got a 17,000-gallon tank or a 200-gallon tank, to summarize, you want to make sure the water quality is great right off the bat.
Right.
You want to make sure that you uptake your food get nutritious food in there, and there's some concoctions that Andrew will obviously chime in on now. You want to make sure that you got a UV sterilizer, and if you have a smaller tank, maybe even a diatom filter. I know some folks, our old school folks, used to use that back in the day, and they believe that
Who's
works.
got that vortex thing laying around?
Right? No, I'm saying on a smaller tank that could work, but you could try all of that instead of trying to pull all your fish out. All that's going to do is add stress, and obviously we can't do that in this instance. We started talking about moving fish and moving corals out, putting them in the 2500, going hypo. There was so many discussions. It was all nerve-wracking, to be quite honest with you.
Well, and the thing is, you have to turn everything you can to your advantage in that situation. So, like, like the dilution thing, I keep saying that, but I mean, that is essential to dilute the number of parasites. Because, look, fish, they have an immune system. They can fight off parasites. They just can't fight off an overwhelming number of parasites. So by, we talk about the UV and the ozone and the diatom filter. And, they now make, like people that have swimming pools, saltwater swimming pools, there are huge diatom filters that
We got one.
Yep.
Our pool
There
filter
you
is
go.
one of
Yeah,
them.
you can modify those,
Yeah.
and you can plumb it into your aquarium, and that is going to trap some of the parasites in the diatomaceous earth. That's another thing you do. Right. Getting over to the nutrition side of it, again, go back to feeding live foods if you can, feeding seafood basically, like shrimp and clams and oysters and all these, and mussels and all these food. And also, if you don't feel like you're getting enough of this from your food, you can buy probiotics. There are vitamins. Beta glucan is a new favorite of mine for fish that have viruses. If fish can get that in their system, the vitamins and the probiotics and the beta glucan in their system, and then that will then equip their immune system through the gut flora. So that's the other side of the equation. I think a lot of people that encounter these problems are, and I'm not saying, look, like I have to feed flake and pellets sometimes too. Sometimes you're rushed, but you don't want to make that a staple. You don't want to make that. You want to make that the exception, not the rule. You want to feed your fish really well. You want to invest in food for your fish.
So just to go back on the dilution, Bobby and Andrew. And Andrew, I know you and I spoke about this with Jonathan, and like folks with sand. Like, have you heard of like people filtering out their sand so that we can collect the trophons?
And we take it out of sand for a while. And while we were doing this peroxide,
is that something you think would help?
Bare bottoms don't have as much trophons, etc., etc.
Are you talking about like vacuuming the sand or something to get the
Or taking it out? Yeah.
I mean, it's sure, it's certainly, I've never thought about that before, but it couldn't hurt. It couldn't hurt to actually go sit there and actually vacuum your sand bed, and that should force the tomons to dislodge and get actually siphoned out of the aquarium. That's the kind of thinking. It's doing every little thing that you can think of to turn the odds more to your favor when faced with a crisis situation like, what you just said.
Okay, Bobby, it's been a pleasure. I'd love to open it up for Q&A and questions for people.
Yep.
And Rashid, you
Yeah, I've been telling all the
right.
questions, so I'm going to start going through them, guys. We'll just keep getting through them pretty quickly, and if anyone that is watching,
just last thing, how many fish vets do you talk to, and how different are the regimens of each one of them? Like, the different opinions of them. I've talked to a few, and it's really amazing, like, the differences.
It does vary quite a bit on their practices. I mean, some, advocate like a strong prophylactic quarantine regimen using lots of medications and chemicals, and some don't. Some just observe in quarantine, or they'll just isolate the fish, or, they're just, saying that, well, you're going to get a fish disease in your tank and you're just going to have to manage it. I will say this, most public aquariums I know, which I probably have more experience talking to them and wholesalers than I do actually veterinarians, is it's kind of weird. Like what they basically do, like most public aquariums do quarantine their fish. And while they do make adjustments based on the species, you know what they quarantine with? Copper sulfate and formalin. They get the fish in, they put them in the QTs, and they run them through a regimen of, copper sulfate, usually at like, 0.2 ppm, and they'll do the 25 ppm formalin every day for a week or two. And after 2 weeks, the fish just go in. And they know that that's not going to kill everything, but it's going to kill enough where they're confident that when the fish go into the displays, they've got management systems in place to handle whatever slips through.
Do they dose the formalin in the quarantine tank, so that's a bath at 25?
No, they do. They usually, they sometimes do both, but it's typically copper and formalin side by side. So while they're running copper sulfate, they're dosing 25 ppm formalin every 24 hours for at least 10 days, and that's their winning combination.
The copper formalin. What was that little company called?
Oh yeah, you're right. Yeah, there was a company that actually they had a product that was both together, right? Yeah. Yeah, I don't. That was a long time
blue
ago.
bottle.
Yeah, I do remember that, but I forget the name of the company. Most people don't realize chloroquine was being used in the late 70s. I think it was called Marex was the name of the product. It was actually, you could buy an aquarium medication that actually had chloroquine, and what people were doing back then, they didn't have corals, they were using it to control parasites in their tank, and also because chloroquine is an algaecide, it was keeping their rocks nice and white.
Right.
Yeah,
Sure.
I think it was Aquatronics was the name of the company.
There you go. That's it. Thank you.
Aquatronics, yep. That's going way back.
All right, let's have some questions.
All right, let's start with questions. So first question earlier from Tyann, and make sure you guys tune into Tyann's.
Oh yeah, we got
Tyann show, Tyann Talk.
Right after this at 8 o'clock.
Yes, so
This
we
is
got
just the lead-in. That's the main event.
exactly. We made sure we orchestrated it that way. So Tyann had a question. How can you tell if a fish is internally affected, if it's not showing any signs externally? And we know some of the signs I'm just going to say is like stringy poop and stuff like that, but any other thoughts?
Right. How do you know whether the uranemia is internal or not, Bobby?
You don't. I mean, unfortunately, because uranema either affects a fish's cells or grows over their internal organs, unless you do a necropsy to actually like cut the fish open and see it. I mean, you're not going to know before the fish dies. You can tell by doing a post-mortem examination that a fish has internal uranema, but you're not going to know that while the fish is alive. Most of the times I tell people to focus on the possibility of a fish having internal parasites or worms, and you can usually tell that. And the fish has to have all of these. It's not just one, because sometimes white stringy poo can just mean intestinal irritation. If a fish has white stringy feces, and especially if a fish is eating a lot, like they're eating voraciously, but they're still like they're just getting thinner and thinner. You see the pinched stomach, that usually means that a fish has an internal parasite or worm that you should food soak, Prozzie, and or Metro to treat.
Okay. Next question is the good old garlic question. Should you add garlic in their food daily? And like, what are just tell us your comments on garlic and what it does help or it doesn't really.
Go ahead, Bobby, garlic.
So, first I'll say there's no scientific evidence. Well, actually, I got to take that back. I have read some things recently. I don't think it was for fish. It was, that garlic does have some properties to it that I think, especially for harmful bacteria. But, it's one of those things that falls into a gray area about there's no scientific evidence that food soaking garlic is beneficial for fish. I also don't believe that, a lot of people say, well, if you feed garlic, you're damaging a fish's liver or kidneys. I don't think at the concentration most people use that happens. Now, I've actually had one theory about garlic that it's just a pet theory of mine. There's no scientific basis for this. But if you've ever been around somebody that eats a lot of garlic, you can smell it on them because it actually leaches through their pores.
Parasites don't like that smell, huh?
I've wondered sometimes if fish eat enough garlic and it leaches back out through their pores into their scales, if that makes them an undesirable host for the parasites. But I mean, that's just me saying that. I don't have any evidence of that.
All right, Paul go ahead.
Some of the old timers that like the Metro in the food liked shaved garlic, natural clove mixed with citric acid in there, along along with the Metro and sulfur.
Yeah.
That's where I think it's an immunity thing.
Well, you know what? If nothing else, garlic is an appetite stimulant. So if you have a new fish that doesn't want to eat, drop a garlic might actually kind of entice a feeding response, if nothing else.
Correct. All right, good.
Next question from Paul wants to know, what temperature would you run a fish quarantine tank? Any specific numbers? 78
to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. So for me, I like it at that temperature because that is warm enough so that, if you do have parasites in the water, they're going to proceed as expected, like a normal life cycle. It's not going to slow down, and you're not going to probably see a strain evict that takes longer than 30 days for all the free swimmers. But you don't want to really be too higher than 80 degrees because higher temperature means less available oxygen in the water. And especially if you're exposing a fish to medications, and you want to have as much oxygen in the water as possible. So that's why you really don't want to go over that 80-degree range. So I think 78 to 80 degrees is ideal for a fish quarantine.
I sort of agree.
Okay, this is a topic we talk a lot about. Tank Life said he knows several people who got ick, etc., from adding corals or inverts that were not quarantined.
Yep.
You guys agree? You guys agree with that?
Yeah.
It can happen, and it's more likely on hard surfaces, rock, snails, something that comes on a rock, and it comes deep in the pores and stuff in the rock. Right, Bobby? Very simple.
Yeah, I think it was John Burgess actually is the one who did this. It was the thesis for his PhD, and he actually tested a number of different surfaces, staghorn coral. He tested shell material. He's tested glass. He tested sand and rock, and he found that when the parasites drop off the fish, that's the trophont stage, and they become protomonts, which crawl around looking for a hard surface to insist upon. All of those surfaces were viable, and they had good adhesion. So, yeah, I mean, again, any hard surface, you add a coral or an invert, that is a possible vector because you could have tomonts on those. The only thing that doesn't seem to be affected is like live coral tissue.
What about the anemone that swallows the thing for 2 weeks?
I remember us talking about that. So, yeah, that's one of those things. I mean, I don't think that a protomont could insist upon the anemone, but yeah, that's an interesting possibility of an anemone swallowing a free swimmer and then pooping it or expelling it back out. So I would say in that situation, I forget what I told you exactly. I think
2
maybe
weeks, 2 weeks, and we cyprobath them anyway, so that 2 weeks works out fine.
Yeah, 2 weeks. Yeah, there's actually on my forum, there's like a chart, and I've got all the various inverts, and I've got like the quarantine, the minimum time frame that you should quarantine them for based on those different scenarios.
So let's follow up on that, Bobby, because next question from Tank Life is regarding that. They had a question, and let's plug Humblefish because we get a lot of information from you directly, Bobby. But where can hobbyists find recommended quarantine protocols and guidelines? Can you walk them through how you have things laid out on your YouTube, your website, and
Reef to reef.
I'm
only kidding.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's plug Humblefish here.
Humblefish forum.
Yeah, on my thank you. Yeah, thank you for plugging the forum. So on my forum, I've got how to quarantine. I've got it's all written out like in a very long, detailed manner exactly how to go about setting up a quarantine, which medications to use. We have articles and what we call them stickies, but articles on every single disease and treatment you can imagine. All kind of stuff thrown in. I am starting to do videos. I've got a YouTube channel now. It's Humble Fish and Reef. And I'm doing basically the information that's written. I'm actually doing like either visual or audio tutorials as well. And I'm actually in the process of redoing all my sticky information to incorporate those videos into the stickies as well. So you've got two ways to learn. If you want to, if you're someone that likes to read and absorb information, you can read it all. If you're someone that wants to watch a YouTube video, well, we're doing that for you too. So all the information is laid out. And I think what's most important as well is if you join the forum, if you have any questions about how to quarantine, if you got any questions about a specific disease, you need an ID on a disease or what medication to use. It's not just myself. We now have an army on my forum that can help you with not just fish disease info, but all of your reefing questions. Some very, very knowledgeable hobbyists are now on my forum, and I really feel like they're the cream of the crop. I think we've got some amazing people on my forum that are just very generous with their time, willing to answer questions and share knowledge.
I agree.
Well, Andrew answers a good amount of questions per day, sometimes specifically on
Bobby,
fish and
sometimes I
corals.
still have to go to the old site just to check the old stickies on some doses. Don't tell anybody.
But you know, that information all still exists on the old site, but it's so outdated that it's because, you know, as I learn more, I keep updating my stickies. Well, I don't update them over there, and only update them on my forum.
Of course.
All right, next question, RC. Are there any dips that can be used to treat coral or macroalgae from a tank with a urinema or bacterial infection?
A dip
So-
to urine. I wish. Good.
Hydrogen peroxide, okay, so this is theoretical. Hydrogen peroxide should work because urinema does not have an encysted stage, it's just a free-living parasite. Then a hydrogen peroxide bath should actually kill urinema. I think, what was the dosage we used? One third H2O2 and 2/3 salt water for 5 minutes? I'm asking my wife because we've done it. So if you do
And what do you
1/3
do? You dip the
hydrogen,
rock in
3%. What's that?
And what do? You dip the rock in there?
Yeah, you can actually take, there's actually on my forum, there's another whole thing about that, and there's, you know, a guy, he's tested all kind of different corals. You can actually use hydrogen peroxide as a coral dip. And I believe it's 1/3 hydrogen peroxide, the 3% kind, 2/3 salt water for 5 minutes. Then you rinse it for another 5 minutes, and then you put the coral in your tank, and that seems to work pretty well.
How does that work for SPS, the peroxide dip? Okay, they can handle it?
I think, you know, I'd have to go back and look at the sticky. I think it's better tolerated by soft corals and LPS than SPS. But I think he's got like a whole, like he breaks it down. I think what he may do for SPS is he lowers the concentration. It's not quite as strong. Because you know how SPS are. They're so sensitive to everything, especially acros, you know?
Well, I mean, Andrew, I'm going to ask this question from Elisa. She said, oh my God, how many bottles of hydrogen peroxide did we use when we went through our ordeal?
We used a 32% solution, so.
More concentrated.
We use not only a few liters of that wicked stuff. Because I
Right.
was only, I think we were using, I mean, Bobby, I think I was using 1 milliliter. I think it's usually 1 mil per 5 gallons in a reef tank. So I was using 1 per 50. So what's 17,000 divided by 50?
Let's see.
Yeah. I'm looking on my forum right now to remember what the dosage is. Because I get hit with so much stuff that I forget some of this stuff sometimes. So the bath dip, this may not be relevant, that I recommend for 3% is it's 20 milliliters of 3% per 1 gallon of salt water. Now, but you were doing in tank. Let me go look at that real quick.
Yeah, in tank. Should be 1 mil per 5 gallons or something like that.
I can pull it. Here it is, peroxide. Okay, so for that, you start at, it looks like 1 ml per 8 gallons, and then you ramp it up over a 4-week period to 1 ml per 5 gallons of the 3% peroxide.
Correct. So, just doing the math here. Divided by
340. 17,000 divided by 50.
Yeah, 300 mils a day. I was 300 mils a dose.
Yeah.
And we were doing that basically 4 times a day. With a night dose, late night dose that was that Jessica claims. That's her name, right, Bobby? The girl,
Yeah.
Jessica.
Yeah,
Jessica claims was
yeah.
good. Release slowly, like a little bit each hour. The 4th one.
Yeah, I want to make that clear if I can. I've done all the experimentation when it comes to quarantine dosages for the peroxide, but all of the in-tank peroxide dosing has actually been done by a lady on my forum. Her name is Jessica. She's my co-admin on my forum. Actually, she's the one that has actually done all of the experimentation, the in-tank reef-safe peroxide dosing experimentation.
Yeah, and if you do this, turn your lights down, guys. If this ever comes, and it does work better with the UV. We know that. That's for sure.
Okay.
All right, next question.
All right, so next question. This is actually a really good question. So this is from Tracy Rogers.
Yep.
She was curious about using Prozzie for flatworms in a reef tank.
Yeah. great
Not
question.
not
That's a
sure
great
not
question.
sure if this is a question relevant to the discussion, but she just worried about the die-off of bristleworms and feather dusters.
Yeah. So this is the old Prozzie in a reef tank. What is it going to do to my urchins? What is it going to do to my snails? What is it? Am I going to have a die-off? Am I going to have something happen that I don't want?
Mostly no. So mostly no. It does seem that two worms, feather dusters, bristleworms, they're pretty resistant against Prozzie Pro. That's not going to be an issue. We talked about previously, sometimes we'll see instances of anemones and SPS bleaching. They usually bounce back. Of course, there are some cases where people say, it actually kills their corals. Those are pretty rare. The flatworm thing is interesting because if you did have a heavy concentration of flatworms in your reef, you dose Prozzie Pro, and I really don't, I'm assuming Prozzie Pro kills flatworms. I don't know for sure. But if it does or it damages them, then I would kind of worry about the flatworms then releasing toxins into the water. And the only way to mitigate that is to do water changes and run carbon. But then, then you're taking the Prozzie out of the water. So I guess that would be one of my main concerns. If you did have a heavy flatworm infestation in your reef, you might not want to use Prozzie until you get that taken care of, because I could see them, even if they're irritated, I can see the flatworms releasing toxins and then killing all of your livestock or most of your livestock.
Yeah, that was the old problem with flatworm exit, right? And that
Yeah.
planaria stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because it would be, again, how effective Prozzie is against flatworms, I don't know, but if it irritates them enough, at least, yeah, I could see them releasing toxins into the water. It would be interesting to know if sometimes when people claim that Prozzie killed all their fish, it'd be interesting to know if they actually had flatworms in the tank, and that's actually what did it.
Well, that's Tracy's responding right now, and she says she saw flatworms in the sump.
Yeah.
So it worked
Right.
when she
So there
treated
you
for
go.
this.
And a lot of people that do use the Prozzie in reef treatments, I've heard, do the double dose and then do a water change pretty quickly after that. They double it up
Right.
in the
Yeah, I'm always leery of that because, something goes wrong. Yeah.
So Eric, sorry, not Eric, Bobby, Eric has a question. So for all the folks living in the cities like myself and don't have room for a quarantine tank, thoughts on safety stop? I know you've addressed this before, but
Yes.
your plan B's and C's if you don't have a large QT system such as us.
So safety stop, as I understand safety stop, the part A is formalin, the part B is methylene blue, which is very similar to, what I recommend, as a pre-quarantine or pre-DT bath of using formalin or hydrogen peroxide, and the second component is NFG. What irritates me about safety stop is I cannot get them to provide me with an SDS that tells me what is in that formalin product, because there are formalin products that are not potent enough. They're not proper formalin has to be 30% formaldehyde and 10 to 15% methanol. If they would just provide me with an SDS and I could see that information in black and white, I could sign off on the product and say it's a good option. But without, I'm a details person. I have to see the ingredients. I have to know the nuts and bolts of it. Without seeing that information, I just can't verify what percentage of formaldehyde and methanol is in their part A of safety stop.
I'm sure it's less than 30, and I'm sure it's just like a quick kind of thing like peroxide, where it sheds it, but it may not be 100% effective.
Right. Yeah, it's not 100%, but it helps. again, you're instead of putting a fish, we'll just go with the DT option. Instead of putting a fish in your DT that's loaded with parasites, well, at the very least, you're putting a fish that has a light parasite load. So maybe that fish can build up some natural immunity, and whatever management techniques you're using, you can get this thing under control before you have an explosion, and it just wipes out all your fish. So yeah, every bit helps. I mean, going back to that.
Is it the same one and the same?
Immunity and resistance?
No, Paragard and the safety stuff.
So Paragard is supposed to be, as I understand it, it's a formalin substitute. Again, it's proprietary, so you don't really know what's in it. I've used it a few times. Honestly, it doesn't, in my opinion, my experience, doesn't do anything. I have not used Safety Stop at all, so I cannot speak my own experience on whether or not Safety Stop works. But I have tried Paragard, and it just doesn't do anything, as far as I can tell.
There you go. All
right. Next question, Deli Del. What strength beta glucan do you use, and do you just crush / pop the pills and mix with food? What's the process?
The beta formula.
Yeah.
The best thing I can do with that is after the live stream in the comments, there's a recipe actually that we have on how to mix the beta glucan in the food. It's a little complicated. So what I'll do is I'll post that information in the comment section after the live stream, so you can actually read about it, because it's a little more complicated to food soak beta glucan than that.
Okay, so to follow up on that, RC had a question too, like where can she find a thread that goes through the hydrogen peroxide experiment as a dip? Or treating in a tank. A dip or treating in a tank.
Oh,
either or.
On your site, Bobby, there's so many threads on your site on hydrogen peroxide. It's almost insane.
What's the URL, Bobby? Spell that out for them.
It's humble.fish.
Humble.fish. Okay.
Yeah, it's just humble and then a period and then fish, and that will redirect you to the forum, and then all the information is. But what I'll do is in the comment section, I'll post some of the things we've talked about. I'll post some links so people have access to the direct information. Like I'll do one for the peroxide bath. I'll do another one for the in-tank reef safe peroxide treatment, so people have quick access to that information.
Okay, and I'll make sure, Bobby, we'll connect. I'll make sure it's in the description so they could also see it.
On a separate note, why do you think when I put an ORP probe in hydrogen peroxide, it reads the normal 300, it's not a big deal, but when you put it in the tank, the ORP actually crashes, which is not a big deal unless you're running ozone, and the ozone is on the entire 6 weeks without stopping. Every time it builds back up, you're ready for a new dose. And that was a concern of mine from just oxidizing, too much oxidation.
Right. Well, both are oxidizers, right? So the ozone's an oxidizer, and peroxide is a very strong oxidizing agent. That's why it's used. It's used to disinfect, surfaces and everything, because of it's a strong oxidizer. So my only guess would be too much oxidation. Those two oxidizers just kind of crashing into each other, so to speak. Would be my guess.
Yeah, I mean yeah, but do you think? Apparently, people without ozone went through this also. They monitored the ORP and it went down anyway. I don't know if it's killing something in the water column or it's just some reaction that the probes are picking up. Who the hell knows?
Right. Well, I will say that
ozone is on the entire 6 weeks.
Some people that have done the in-tank peroxide dosing have done before and after aquabiomics testing, and he also tests like the beneficial bacteria, and in some cases you kill the good with the bad, right? It doesn't discriminate. Right. So there's been cases where you'll have a healthy nitrifying bacteria, and then after you do the peroxide dosing, it's minimal, and people find they need to dose bacteria back to get it back where it is. So yeah, that again just kind of demonstrates the efficacy of peroxide and what a strong oxidizing agent it is, and it kills the good with the bad. Right. So that's just something I wanted to throw in there. I don't want people to think that peroxide is a cure-all and there's no downside to it. Yeah, of course there's downsides to it,
So next one, Bobby and Andrew, this is a good question, right? There's a new approach with corals, especially coming if they're wild or a long trip, where they're like, hey, don't dip them so quick because you might just kill that thing.
Right.
Go through a phase where you're watching and let them acclimate.
Yep.
So RC's specific question is, are there any arrival conditions that would prevent you from using the hydrogen peroxide and formalin baths when first receiving a fish that was just shipped?
Well, I'll tell you, if you see a red sore on the fish,
Yeah.
there's a good chance it's already, I mean, it's DOA and you don't even know it yet, and the minute you put it in formalin, it's done, okay? That's one thing I've learned. Bobby, what's the question is basically, when is it like the pre-arrival fish and you're like, holy cow, I can't do this? I have to put them through a formalin bath?
Yeah, like what do you look for?
X, Y, Z? Yeah, Bob.
Yeah.
So 2 circumstances I can think of. Well, red sores. So whether the red sore is being caused by urinema or a bacterial infection, which, like Andrew's saying, the fish, I hate to say it, the fish is toast. I mean, if the fish comes in with red sores, there's a good chance you're not going to save it. But what happens is if you put that fish in peroxide, the peroxide actually burns the red sore. It just burns the hell out of the fish. Well, the fish is probably going to die just from that experience alone. Another situation where you would not want to do a peroxide or formalin bath is if a fish has ammonia burn. So you get a fish that's shipped to you, it's in cloudy, stinky water, you can smell the ammonia, then that means that the gills are already inflamed, and if you expose that fish to formalin or peroxide, it's just going to cause further inflammation, further damage. So those are 2 situations where you would not want to expose a fish to formalin or really any medications except maybe methylene blue or antibiotics until the fish is healed.
I know that when a fish has traveled a long distance, let's say from Western Australia, and I get it, and I know it's particularly sensitive to medication. Let's talk about something like Leopard Wrasses. They're impossible, okay? I will quarantine them with no meds for the first several days and then make that med call after. They get they come in, they just go right into salt water, and I'll watch them. Bobby, I mean, there are certain fish like that that just can't handle the meds right after the long travel.
Right. Yeah. Especially if you've got a fish that's been in transit a long time. I mean, especially if you encounter a situation where shipping did not go as expected. The fish is supposed to arrive in 24 hours, and it takes you 2 or 3 days to get the fish. The bag water is cloudy. It stinks. You do not want to expose those fish to any medications right away. You want to just put them in clean water, let them calm down. The only exception I would say would be methylene blue or NFG, because those are medications technically, but they're actually designed to help fish that are in a situation like that I might have ammonia burn or something like that, to help heal their gills. Methylene blue, for example, is extremely well tolerated. You can overdose that, and it doesn't really have any negative effects. I've actually
somehow when something doesn't do that much, I tend not to use it.
Well, I one time had a shipment of that got stuck. It was like in the middle of the summer, and it got stuck somewhere for like a week or something like that.
Wow.
And I get these fish in, and I mean, it's just horrible. But some did survive.
Right.
So the fish that survived, I just put them in a bare QT with just like an air bubbler, and I dosed methylene blue and ran them. Kept them in that for a few days before then running them through my quarantine protocol, and most of them did fine. So that would be the situation that, you don't want to expose a fish to any meds other than methylene blue straight away.
So it's more sensitive to fish, according to the charts, plus the longer the travel. I would say those are the 2 variables. I agree with that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and wrasses are funny too. Wrasses are one of those, talk about sensitive fish.
Yeah.
They can be sensitive to meds right off the bat. That's a good fish to kind of let it settle in.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
And amphibious, I go slowly too, Bobby.
Yeah. Well, and especially if it's a fish that is not, you're not sure if it's eating, because fish, medications suppress appetite. So you want to be sure that sometimes that fish is eating before you begin medication, because you don't want to be sitting here wondering, is the fish not eating just because it was never eating, or is the medication suppressing the fish's appetite?
CP could really suppress the appetite. So can Prozzie, big time.
Yep. Yep.
So guys, I'm going to ask my last question, and we really, really do thank you, Bobby. We're almost close to 2 hours here. Great conversation and great information. Also, don't want to eat into Tyan's time as she starts her live. Her live just started. The last question is regarding the chromies, Andrew. They're wondering, with all the chromies we recently brought in, did we just do 2 formalin treatments, and did we use anything else? Any thoughts on tree oil for uranema? 2 questions there.
Okay, so the tree oil, the Peachtree tree oil is the first time I've heard of it now through Bobby today. It's the first time I've heard of it. And they were in chloroquine phosphate for a month in my tank and received 2 formalin baths. And after a month, Bobby will tell you, fish don't, in chloroquine, they start doing crazy things. They start doing flips and backflips, and they'll worsen it after a month anyway. So there's no reason to go past a month. Bobby, thoughts?
I'm sorry, repeat that question?
The question had to do with, what was the question? It had to do with uranema, the chromis. What were they in? They were in chloroquine for a month, which is hard enough on the fish, a month in chloroquine. You know that they start doing crazy things usually after 2-3 weeks. They don't like chloroquine. And I did 2 formalin baths, and the question was, is that enough?
It's enough, but I would still do a prolonged observation period because, again, back to, the possibility of internal uranema. Usually when a fish has internal uranema, what ends up happening is the scales or the skin turns sort of a brownish color. And then my theory is those are the parasites actually eating through the fish, or actually eating from the inside out. And then usually the brown spots turn to red sores, and then, you've got, external uranema. So even if you put a fish through formalin, chloroquine treatment, especially with chromis, I would observe them for at least 30 days in non-medicated water, because you don't want anything suppressing symptoms before giving them the all clear and putting them in your DT. So a minimum of a 30-day observation period in non-medicated water.
And the food needs to be laced with Metro, particularly Metro in this case, as opposed to fenbendazole, because you're dealing with this uranema as opposed to worms.
Yeah, you want to food soak Metro, or you can food soak chloroquine. That's the other option, but you have to kind of lace it with garlic or something to get fish to eat chloroquine because of that metallic taste.
Yep.
Yeah. So, but I hate to tell it, most people just stay away from chromis right now. I mean, until this thing gets figured out, it's just not worth it.
Exactly.
There's nothing like a schooling bunch of chromis, though. That's the beauty of it.
Well, listen, guys, from Polo Reef, I would like to thank you on behalf of all the fans out there who've been asking questions. 2 old school reefers who really are passionate about the hobby, Andrew and Bobby. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and I appreciate the watch. And go watch Tank Talk with Ty now. Thank you, Bobby. Humble Fish. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. I'll try not to, panic and call you in the middle of the night. It's been a while since I've done that.
That's the goal. Thank you guys so much.
Thanks so much. It's humblefish.com forum.
It's just humble.fish. Just humble, a period, and then fish. That will take you right there.
I recommend everybody doing that reading. Reading the threads is actually more it's really informative, the threads itself, as opposed to the conclusions.
Right, just to get some information out, as you guys know, Andrew, our tank will be featured on Coral Magazine, September feature, and Andrew will be presenting at MACNA this year. So a lot to come from the channel. Any questions you guys have, apologies for any technical difficulties. We're continuing to work on that. But the website is going to be up and running very, very soon, along with the gear to come. So thank you guys all for joining. We're going to end it right now. You have a great evening, and thank you so much, Bobby.
Everybody, Tank Talk with Tian. I'm going now.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, Bobby.
Good night.
Good night.